Hi guys, welcome back to the channel today. I hope everyone is having an awesome day. Today I did want to talk to you guys about the mighty Sega Genesis. Now if you remember back to the 90s, the console wars were raging along. Sega and Nintendo were going head to head and it was just a great time to be a gamer. We're going to dive into why I think the Sega Genesis was totally underrated. And we're going to go over why I think this is one of the best consoles of the generation, why the prices are skyrocketing right now, the games, the consoles, everything. The prices are through the roof, guys, and it's a collectible you want to get in on if you are an avid game collector like myself. And we're going to get started in this video by going back in time a little bit.
What's the hottest 16-bit video game system with true arcade games, great graphics, real challenge, stereo sound, and the hottest library too, with games like Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Super Hang-On, Forgotten World, Space Harrier 2, Revenge of Shinobi, Tommy Lasorda Baseball, Truxton, Last Battle, Arnold Palmer Tournament Golf, Super Thunderblade, Zoom, Thunder Force 2, Ghouls and Ghosts, Mystic Defender, Rambo 3, and more. Genesis from Sega. Genesis, the new generation in video games.
As you can see, the Genesis had a lot of awesome games. They were very vibrant. The graphics were really good on the system at the time. And they did have this sound blasting technology, as they called it. I don't believe it was anything grand. It was just a marketing gimmick. But the games did look and feel a little bit better than the Super Nintendo to me. We're going to take a quick look at the Sega Genesis models. There were quite a bit of them. There was a lot of add-ons for these consoles as well. The first gen Genesis came out in 1989 in North America. To me, this was the best looking console. There was two slightly different variations of this. The one model had a 16-bit HD graphics sticker on it, and the other one did not. And you will see it around the top of the round part, just above where the cartridge goes in. The one with the HD graphics seems to be a little bit harder to find. The second generation model came out. This one looked a little bit plainer. It was a little more sleek. It did lend itself well for the Sega CD. These fit together really well in the game case. I believe the Sega CD was developed for this console. And then we had the Genesis 3 model that came out at the very end of the life cycle. This console only ran for about a year. It's very hard to find, and it probably is the most expensive one of the three. Just getting a box for this will cost you about $100. Now, I do have a Genesis 3 console in my collection. I'm on the hunt for a box, but it's really hard to part with $100 just for an old video game box. I did have one ordered, but there was a big fiasco and the shipping company lost it. So I had to get a refund through eBay, and I was pretty bummed about it because the box was mint and it would have completed it. But it is what it is. I'm still on the hunt, and I will keep you guys updated on that. Now, as for add-ons, I'll pop it up on the screen and you can see here. Now, there's a console. This one has the CD and the 32X add-on. Now, to me, these attachments were not the best idea for Sega. They should have just made a new console. Everyone was moving on at the point when the 32X came out. Like, no one wanted to plug this into just a regular Genesis and play it. The new consoles were just coming out, and this is where Sega started to fall a little bit behind. I believe Nintendo beat them to the punch with their console releases. And this is one of the reasons Sega fell behind in the console wars. Now we'll get into Sega's marketing strategy here. You could tell that this console was geared towards older gamers, and by older I'm going to say, 20, 30, 40-year-old type gamers. As where Nintendo kept true to their core audience, to me, which is the younger crowd. I think Sega did this really well. They had some more, I'm not going to say like mature games, but a lot of the games were catered to the older audiences. The fantasy stuff like Golden Axe and Altered Beast. A lot of the sports titles, the Maddens, the NHL games on these consoles were absolutely awesome. They were one of my favorite games of all time. And really that stretch of 93, 94, 95 NHL games were the best NHL games ever made. While Sega's marketing was really good, they still could not defeat the juggernaut, which is Nintendo. The Super Nintendo is one of my favorite consoles of all time as well. This console generation in general was really awesome. Now, by today's standards, yeah, the graphics are not that great, but the vibrant colors, the music, the sound, this was just a great time to be a gamer. And when you grew up in that generation, you thought this was really epic. Unfortunately for Sega, they never did get over this hump. They were always second fiddle to Nintendo. And then when big players like Sony and Microsoft came in the gaming market, this pretty much did spell the end for Sega, which is very unfortunate. Because I think if there was actually a few more console makers and a little bit more competition, the gaming market might look a little bit different. Now, the Sega Genesis did have a true mascot, just like Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic. The Sonic games were completely different than the Mario games. They were a lot faster, they were a lot more hectic, there was just a lot of crazy stuff going on. I think Sega really went all in on this, and they did a really good job with it. And Sonic games are still made today, so obviously it's still good for the company as a whole. But it was one of those catch-22s where, in my opinion, Sonic still catered to the young kids, but not so much the older crowd. Now, when I was playing this, I wasn't that old. For me, it was the games geared to the older crowd that really drew me to the console, and not so much the Sonic games. So let's talk about games. Now, the Sega Genesis had a library of about 876 games. Given that the console's lifespan was so long, I don't find this outrageous. This is a vast library of games, however, and there's so many good games on this that you really do need to check out. Now, there are some that are still reasonably priced. I will be perfectly honest with you guys. A lot of these games are getting very expensive, and as an avid Genesis Sega guy, I can tell you it's getting very difficult for the average collector on these platforms. So if you are fortunate enough to find any of these out in the WildNet yard sales, you definitely want to pick them up. And my motto for the Sega stuff is, if it's any game and it's $5, I just buy it, because, you know, most of the games are worth $5 anyways, and you're not going to go wrong. That being said, some of the exclusive titles on this that are the higher selling ones, you know, all the Sonic games, not a big surprise there. There was a Disney Aladdin game that was a very good seller for them. There was a Jurassic Park game that has a really classic and iconic cover, and it is sought after by collectors. Just some other high selling games, you know, you had the NBA Jam, Street Fighter. And Sega did a really good job at porting these arcade games onto the Genesis and making them look really good. I was always impressed with that aspect of it. They just seemed a little bit better looking than the Super Nintendo versions. Maybe that was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but that's just my own personal opinion. And you definitely want to do your research on these games. There is really a game for everyone on the platform. I particularly like the covers on these. You know, the Punisher, it's very expensive. The X-Men titles look really good. Sega really did a good job with the clamshells on these. I really like the red design and the durability of the clamshells, as opposed to the Super Nintendo's cardboard boxes, much like the original Nintendo's. The cardboard just didn't hold up with little kids, you know, opening them up and that. Most of the time, the clamshells for these held up, and when you do find them, they're in reasonable condition, I would say. You can, however, buy the reproduction clamshells. The ones I've seen don't quite look like the original. I would say the plastic is a little bit too shiny on it. They need to be a little bit more corrugated and have that foggier look. But that's just nitpicking. When they're up on a shelf, you really don't notice. And as for display purposes, these look way better than the Super Nintendos. And again, this is all just personal opinion. I was never a huge Nintendo guy. While I like Nintendo stuff, Sega is just a little bit cooler in my opinion, and it's probably just because I grew up with it and I have a little bit of bias towards it. You know how it is when it comes to collecting your old nostalgic games. You pretty much like the stuff you grew up with a little bit more. This is what it is. Now, just to add to the gaming part of this, there are a lot of homebrew titles as well, and if you are into that sort of thing, they are readily available. There's lots of digital ones and physical ones. You just need to get out there and look. If you want to go on eBay, you can find them, and I'm sure if you scour Reddit posts, you will find lots of information on these games, and there's a ton of them out there. Just be aware that a lot of them can be shovelware, and they might not be the highest of quality. But hey, people are trying and adding to the library to these consoles, and I give them credit for that for sure. Now let's talk about the big rivalry here. While Nintendo's marketing did stick to a wider casual audience, Sega stuck to the mantra of more mature, hip, trendy type stuff. And in the end, when you do cater to a much larger audience, you are probably going to win. And that's what we had here with Nintendo. I just think at that point, while Sega was competing, at this point, Nintendo was pretty unstoppable with their IPs, and it was going to be really hard for any company to dethrone them. I think Sega took a good shot at it, but I just don't think it was in the cards for the company at the time. So we'll just touch on collecting a little bit here. Now, if you are in the market for a Sega Genesis console, I have good news for you. They're not that expensive, and they are pretty easy to collect. There's a lot of them out there. The original Genesis, you're probably going to be in that $80 range. The 16-bit one, you might be the one with the sticker on it might be a little bit more. Oftentimes there's not that much different in price. It just seems a little bit more scarce to me. Now the second gen Genesis, this is the one that is the cheapest, and if you are looking for just a console just to play the games on, this is probably the one for you. They rarely fail. They're very basic, and they always seem to work. I don't think I've ever had one of these not work, and I've bought and sold quite a bit. I think I have 3 in my totes right now. I just don't have any boxes for them. You can pick these up for 40 or 50 bucks, usually with a couple games with it and a controller. And if I was just starting out collecting and I wanted something just to play the games on, if I didn't have a Retron or something, I would pick up a Gen 2. Now we'll jump ahead to the Generation 3. This one's going to cost you a little bit more. I got lucky. I think I paid $30 for mine. I saw it on a local website that someone was selling, and I went and grabbed it. You can pick these up the odd time, but again, you're probably going to be in that $100 range for the Gen 3, and there's not a lot of these out there. Until a few years ago, I really didn't even know these existed because I never had one, and I wasn't really playing the Genesis that much at the end of its life cycle. I had moved on. I just saw it by chance in a store, and I thought, hey, if I ever give a chance, something I'll pick up for my collection. Now, the attachments will cost you a little bit more money here. The CD drive and the 32X attachment, they didn't sell a lot of these. They will cost you probably at least $100 each, and they'll go up from there. And then in the box, you're going to be paying a lot more for all of this stuff. If you are a completionist like me, you want the stuff in the box. And if you're not, more power to you, because it's going to cost you a lot less money. Now, they did make a bazooka type attachment called the Menacer. It mirrored the Super Scope for the Nintendo. They were kind of doing the same stuff at the time. Pretty interesting. I forget the game that came with it, but there was a game that came with it in the box as well. So that's just a neat collectible you want to keep an eye out for. And you can still find these in the box at your local game stores and stuff. They are kicking around. Now, I just wanted to add a little bit to the collecting here. If you are collecting the 32X, the Sega CD, much like the consoles, games in general, they're very expensive now. It's going to be really hard to find deals on some of this stuff. Other than yard sales and an odd flea market, you're going to expect to pay up for this, and there's not really any way of getting around it. I believe the Genesis itself has really taken off in popularity in the past. I'm going to say 3 to 5 years. The YouTubers are starting to notice this, and you know what happens when YouTubers start jumping in on a bandwagon on something. It definitely pumps the value up on this stuff. Just make sure you're not overpaying for this. Look for the deals, and make sure when you are buying for your collection, you're not going crazy with it. You're not spending money you don't have on it, because that's not really what collecting is about. Collecting, to me, is about the hunt for the stuff and finding the things you actually like and enjoy for a reasonable price that you can tolerate. And to me, the best part of collecting is actually getting a deal on stuff, and that's why we love yard saling so much. I just like getting the deals. I rarely go into a game store and pay an expensive amount for a game. Now, if I go in and I see some shovelware or some $5 games that I perceive as a pretty good value for a platform I'm collecting on, yeah, I might pick up a couple, but for me, it's all about collecting and not really spending a lot of my own money on it, and that's how I've always been with it, and it just makes it more enjoyable for me. And if you have been with me for quite a while on the channel, you will know that Genesis is one of my top tier video game consoles of all time, and I still love it. On that note, I'm going to get out of here. I got a bunch of stuff to do. Everyone in Canada, have an awesome Thanksgiving weekend. If you're in Europe, the United States, or anywhere else, just enjoy your weekend with your family, and we'll see you on the next one. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, show me your collection, let me know what you got, and let's talk about it. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.